pulse and glide routine. We're monitoring it with the torque application on an Android device. This is torque. We go to real-time information. We go to the custom-made gauges, and here we see we're starting with an engine temperature of 150 degrees. We've got our instant trip miles per gallon here on the center left, trip miles per gallon on the upper left, trip distance, second gauge from the left on the top, engine load at the bottom left. The other things to watch are the car speed, which is GPS speed here, third from the left on the top row, and engine RPMs, which tell us whether the engine is running or not. The ultra gauge down here does the same thing. This is the calibrated device, so we rely on it for accuracy. Instant miles per gallon, upper left, trip miles per gallon, upper right, trip distance, center right, and engine load, center left. So we're monitoring engine load, trying to keep our pulse at 90% for this particular engine. It'll vary with different engines. The car tachometer is right here, lower right of the big instrument cluster. Speedometer is the big gauge. Okay, there's a kill switch here on the gear shift lever, which I've rigged up to shut off fuel injection. We're ready to roll. We'll put it in gear, start the engine up. Again, we're trying to keep engine load up about 90%. That's fairly brisk. Get up to 40 miles an hour. Hit the kill switch down here and glide. We're up only 22 miles a gallon, but we're only 0.2 of a mile into the trip. We ran the engine for about 1/10 of a mile. And we're gliding the rest of the way. We're up to 36 miles a gallon already because we barely ran the engine. We're 0.4 of a mile into this trip, and we only ran the engine the first 1/10 of a mile roughly. So here we are approaching 50 miles a gallon on the torque app. The ultra gauge, you'll notice, shows no trip miles per gallon yet. It won't register anything until the engine's run for a total of about 1 minute's running time. It's a quirk of the programming on the ultra gauge device, but as you can see, by coasting 0.6 of a mile or 0.5 of a mile from an initial engine run of about 1/10 of a mile, we're up to 75 miles a gallon on the torque app. We're down to 25 miles an hour, so I'm going to bump start the engine. Try to keep that engine load at about 90%, which is the best brake-specific fuel consumption rate. And then we kill the engine at 40 miles an hour, glide down again. Maybe about 2 more pulses before the ultra gauge starts to register anything. The torque app says we're going 76 miles a gallon. We won't obviously be able to keep this the whole way. Okay, here we are approaching 25. Let out the clutch. Get that engine load around 90% or less. Hit the kill switch. Okay, the ultra gauge is starting to register now. It's up to 60 miles a gallon. We've got a little uphill here, so I'm not going to do our 25 to 40 pulse here. I'm going to slow it down a little and pulse from 18 to 30, just enough to get us over this hill. At 25 miles an hour. So I'm going to get it up to maybe 35 miles an hour here. This was accelerating in third gear. We want to crest the hill at about 25 to keep our miles up. And you see we're well over 60 miles a gallon with the ultra gauge, which is the accurate fuel consumption meter. We're only 2 miles into the trip, 1.9 miles into the trip on each of the gauges, and we're well up into the 65 mile per gallon range now. And this is a boxy car. It's a Scion XB, which is pretty aerodynamically challenged. If I was in a compact car, I could probably get 5 to 10 miles a gallon better. Okay, I forgot to pulse there. We're a little below 25, but we'll manage. The pulse brings us down into the 65 mile per gallon range on the torque app. The glide takes us back up into the 70 mile per gallon range. And you can see the ultra gauge is up into the 65 mile per gallon range again. Pretty decent. Again, we're gliding here. We're going to pulse because we're down at 25 miles an hour. So we're going to pulse up to 40. Again, try to keep that engine load at 90% or less. It's actually a fairly brisk acceleration rate for most cars to accelerate at 90%. But 90% may not be the most efficient engine load range for your car. So we're pretty much on the end of each glide, getting it pretty close to 65 miles a gallon. And we'll probably keep that all the way to the end of the test. 64.5 at the beginning of this pulse. You can't see it, but there's a bit of a downhill here, so we'll gain back about 1.5 miles a gallon on the next pulse, the past pulse on the next one. So we're 3.2 miles in the trip, maintaining 63 miles a gallon on the ultra gauge. Looks like a dead coyote pup there on the road. 65 miles a gallon on the ultra gauge, 69.9, 70 on the torque app. slowing down here, but we're at the crest of a hill, so I'm going to let the speed build up, gliding down the hill here. Okay, we're losing speed now, so I'll pulse another time. So we're 4.5 miles into this trip, and we're nearing the end of a turnaround here, so I'll turn it off and coast to the turnaround where I'll shut off the recorder. Some kind of vehicle parked at the end of the road here. Turn around in the Duck Club entrance here. Okay, 69.5 miles per gallon on the torque app, 64.4 on the ultra gauge for a 5.2 mile trip.